Perhaps this is what it would be like if Alan Shepard were to have gone aboard a space shuttle mission. Continuing a little tour around the Kennedy Space Center, vehicle assembly building off in the distance there. This is the place where the VIPs sit for launches. If you ever watched the very old television show I Dream of Jeannie, hurts to say very old, but the I Dream of Jeannie used the Kennedy Space Center headquarter building as the headquarter building in I Dream of Jeannie. So the look at the mobile launch platform that sits atop the crawler, the world's slowest moving vehicle. Sense of scale here, this gentleman with the crawler transporter and the mobile launch platform. We'll show you a little history of the crawler transporter from the History Channel. At the time that I was on the tour for Kennedy Space Center, there was a crawler visible, and they had just returned from loading up a shuttle for a launch, and so the track's somewhat fresh with the depressions in there. And apparently I was quite obsessed with getting pictures of this depression of the famous Tennessee River Rock. They have to import, not necessarily import, but they have to get the Tennessee River Rock brought down to Florida to reduce that friction. So obviously quite a taken with the crawler transporter footprints. And there's one of the launch pads. And we had to snap a photo of this, as this is the railroad lines that takes the solid rocket boosters from Kennedy Space Center back to Utah, and then from Utah back to Florida. So a little pipeline, if you will, to Utah there. The Soviet, now Russian, space program, they also will transport their rockets by railroad. There's the vehicle assembly building. And then the other launch pad, as I mentioned, had a shuttle that was fairly recently delivered. Gotta love zoom on our phones. Probably the closest I would ever see a shuttle at the launch site. And without the zoom feature, that's as close as I could get legally. This is where the mission countdown and count up clock is. So you're looking at it side on right here. The flag shown in many of the great documentaries and actual film footage of launches. Once the countdown reaches 0, then you start upwards counting for the mission, and that's your mission elapsed time. That happens to be in your Alpha Mix Appendix, MET, mission elapsed time. I thought this was pretty creative at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You probably have no idea what that is. I mean, it looks like the profile of a perhaps Mercury capsule. What was the coolest thing you saw on your vacation? Well, I saw a payphone at the airport. What's that? It's a phone you put coins in to make calls. Look, I took a picture of it with my phone. Wow. Yep, I took a picture while on vacation of a payphone. Pretty clever way to house it. And it's a throwback to Capcom, Capsule Communicator. Now, even though we're moving to the Space Shuttle program, and it wasn't a capsule, it's now a space plane, we still, for historical purposes, call it Capcom, Capsule Communication. And the first ever test vehicle for the Space Shuttle program was originally slated to be called the USS Constitution. And this was to be an anniversary of the 1776 signing of the US Constitution. And there was a clipper ship named the USS Constitution, or nicknamed Old Ironsides. And the Constitution was to be the name of the first test vehicle for the shuttle program because 1976 was the 200th anniversary of the Constitution. And in 1997, the actual Constitution modified, brought up to date, was set sail unassisted for the first time in 116 years. A spectacular moment there. And in the August of 2012, 19th of August 2012, the USS Constitution sails in Boston Harbor to commemorate her victory in the War of 1812. So magnificent to see such a piece of history still able to perform its seafaring adventures. Now, 1976 was a great time for the world of Star Trek fans. They felt very much that the first modern, in that era, vehicle traveling to space, should have the appropriate name of the flagship of the Starfleet, Enterprise name. And they wrote a petition to NASA asking them to consider changing the test vehicle's name from Constitution to Enterprise. If you were to be in the Smithsonian, there is the Enterprise that was used in the motion movie picture for Star Trek. And one of the things that was decided upon early within the Space Shuttle program was that all the orbiters, the things that were going to orbit our planet, the spacecrafts that were to orbit our planet, they should all be named after great ships of discovery, like the Constitution. Well, there was actually a clipper ship known as Enterprise. The Navy actually has an aircraft carrier called the Enterprise. Hence, if you're a Star Trek fan, if you ever tried to join the Navy just so you could serve aboard the Enterprise. So what do you think? These hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of Star Trek fans wrote in and convinced NASA to change the name? Well, you can either see blurred up here it says Enterprise, or maybe you would recognize actors from the original Star Trek series, which I highly doubt. But here they are at the unveiling of the Enterprise, the first test vehicle for the shuttle program. And these are some of the actors. This is Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. And in the Star Trek movie, there is the history of the Enterprise. So the clipper ship, aircraft carrier, the test vehicle for the Space Shuttle program, and then in Star Trek mythology, the Enterprise space station vehicle here, and the history of the USS Enterprise. Fact, 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 and science fiction. There was a Star Trek spin-off series called Star Trek Enterprise, all about the Enterprise. And in the captain's quarters, Captain Archer's quarters, he had these images of the clipper ship, aircraft carrier, the test vehicle for the Space Shuttle program, and the Enterprise he was serving on. And these are images by John Eaves. And in the Space Museum of Room 119 at Ridgeline, we have an autographed by John Eaves image showing his artwork that was in the Enterprise series. So continuing on the individual frames here, that is the Enterprise. You can always distinguish the Enterprise from actual space-flown orbiters in two ways. One, the Enterprise has these individual window panels and also had this aerodynamic point at the front. And then the Enterprise ship from Star Trek. Now, perhaps I'm making that up. Always good to see if someone else will back me up.
Enterprise, the first space shuttle test vehicle, was originally to be named Constitution in honor of the U.S. Constitution's bicentennial. However, viewers of the popular TV science fiction show Star Trek started a write-in campaign urging the White House to change the name to Enterprise. Designated OV-101, the newly named Enterprise was rolled out of the assembly facility on September 17, 1976, to begin its work as a flying test bed. Although it never flew in space, the Enterprise flew 8 captive flights attached to the 747 shuttle carrier and 5 free flights that landed at Edwards Air Force Base. The Enterprise was enormously successful helping test and prove technologies that would be needed in future space shuttles. In November 2003, Enterprise was moved to the Smithsonian Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center near Washington Dulles Airport, where it is now on permanent public display.
So the flag for the Enterprise, anytime a vehicle is in active use, the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral, Florida, will fly its flag underneath the U.S. flag by that countdown and count up clock. So the Enterprise for the United States, we have this first patch, which is for the approach and landing test. So as mentioned in that clip, this vehicle was never flown in space. It was never intended to. It was entirely a test vehicle, testing the capability for landing a vehicle on an airway strip and not in the ocean. You do want to jot down 1977 as when these approach and landing tests were conducted. And you had two crews, Fred Hayes, you might recognize from the Apollo 13 missions. Here's the approach part in the sense of once you've been put at the altitude that you could then maneuver the vehicle to approach the landing site. So beginning the approach phase. And this cover right here is to protect the motors at the back. There's a better angle of that protective cover there. And there's the Enterprise in flight. And part of that approach and landing test is the landing, so the wheels drop down. Many people forget that the Space Shuttle program had landing gear. And success landing in Edwards Air Force Base in California. Important for the pilots in the Enterprise were the T-38s, these flights that were flown simultaneously, and the pilots could communicate to each other and offer guides and assistance. So the patch for the Talon T-38 for the Enterprise and for the Space Shuttle program. The T-38s are also actively involved at every launch of a shuttle. You can see one on the launch pad there, and this is that road all the way to the VAB. I always wonder why they couldn't just run a straight shot, but of course the land isn't there for that. But the T-38 is actively involved in making sure that the pad is safe, checking weather conditions. So the crews, we have Hayes and Fullerton. We have Fullerton in the foreground and the Enterprise in the background. And Fullerton was the first pilot for the Enterprise test program, and this is astronaut Fred Hayes, who was the first commander for the shuttle approach and landing test. So the pilot, Fullerton, pilot always sits on the right side, and commander always sits on the left. So Hayes there. Here is a comparison with a more modern cockpit of a spaceflown orbiter versus the Enterprise cockpit here. You gotta love what you and I would probably call joysticks. In the world of NASA, we must refer to them as the RHC, the rotational hand control. And here you can see mission control for the Enterprise test and approach vehicle. And the T-38 being guided in by the carrier, the Boeing 747 for the Enterprise. And although the Enterprise never took off and went into space, they did have the full-size mock-up, so they would check to make sure that the mating procedures in the vehicle assembly building worked, making sure they could roll it out to the launch platform, or the launch pad with the platform and the crawler. So make sure that all is well for the next phase for NASA's human spaceflight. And to wrap up the Enterprise look at the test and approach landing, let's just show you it in action.
operators, go for takeoff. GNC. Go. Fido. Go. Arrow. Go. Loki. Go. Network. Go. Inco. Go. FAO. Go. Homer. Go. AMR. Go. Rockwell. Go. Roger. Roger, we're go for takeoff.
Flaps coming to 5. Okay, Enterprise is set. Thanks to the left heads. And we'll stand by for the bang, Darno. Wasn't too bad, no. Yeah, okay, she's flying good.
Okay, he's start to turn now. Fine.
Enterprise, you're clear to start to turn. Okay, starting to turn to final. You got you. Straighten her up, Darno, not quite made. Okay. Slightly low. Okay. Stop her here a minute. Yeah, we ought to be turning at 7. Okay. How's it look for position? Okay. Okay, we are armed and flare. Standing by the gear. Okay, the gear is coming down at 270. Coming down. Mark. Gear coming. Okay, 3 downs. Gear's down. 240. 230. 220, lots of speed. Beautiful. 210. 210. 200. 195. And the speed brakes are coming. Okay, 60 knots. Try the nose wheel. Okay. That was too good a glider.
Picture book flight, wasn't it? Congratulations, boy. Thank you.
And you could have your own Enterprise Space Shuttle kit. Of course, the vehicle itself never went into space, but a fun little model kit. Notice here ESA, the European Space Agency, with their promised space lab. Not sure why the astronaut there is standing outside on the space lab, outside of the orbiter, but that's okay. You could have your own snap-tight model kit of the Enterprise.